The Scars of Eden, Chapter 8, Times and Places. Balmain, Sydney, Australia, January 2020. The Greyhound bus has brought me to some familiar streets. I love this part of the journey. I always remember the sense of adventure the first time I landed in Australia more than 20 years ago. I could sense that new discoveries awaited me here, and they did. Here I met my now wife, Ruth, and together we began a whole new journey of exploration. Today I'm in Sydney to make some fresh discoveries. I am meeting a small gathering of researchers and experiencers of ET phenomena. It's taken 3.5 hours to get here from Canberra, but I have made the trip in the company of Phaedo and Timaeus and Critias, the 2 books of Plato I recommended to Reuben. To be fair, Plato's writing style has taken me some time to get used to, but I have found it well worth the effort. There is so much in those books to expand my thinking, and so much to intrigue and mystify. For instance, when Plato speaks of extraterrestrial children of God, who or what does he have in mind? He teases us with that language. In fact, his choice of words echoes the language of Genesis 6, the B'nai Elohim, who came and hybridized with human females in the story that precedes the Great Flood. By contrast, Plato's associations with the children of God are positive. For him, they were benevolent beings who nurtured our development, heightened our intellect, and helped develop our state of consciousness to better enjoy the potential of life on Earth. Another mystery. Who were the mysterious others living on islands in the sky with so much advanced knowledge of the wider cosmos? The Mesopotamian text calls them Anunnaki, or sky people. Genesis called them Elohim, the powerful ones. The Popol Vuh describes them as those who engineer. The Vedas, the Nordic and Greek texts, tell stories of kings and gods. Babylonian legend refers to the Apkallu. Ancient narratives from the Efik people of Nigeria name them as Abasi and Atai. The Dogon people of Mali, West Africa, say their prehistoric tutors came from a planet orbiting Sirius C. The Egyptian and Mayan books of the dead both point to stars in the constellation Orion. Aboriginal Australians and many Native American tribes point to the Pleiades and say that those who nurtured their cultures came from there. Somehow, Plato achieved a bird's-eye view of this great canon of ancient knowledge from around the world, all of which raises an obvious question. How can we possibly have forgotten what he had and so many cultures have remembered? As I begin to make my own tour of the world's ancestral narratives, as Plato must have done 2.5 millennia ago, I notice that the same specific regions of outer space keep cropping up. When identifying the original home of our prehistoric visitors, ancient cultures repeatedly point to 3 regions among the stars: Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades. Intriguingly, the Bible's oldest book, Job, connects all 3. The book of Job is a bit of a mystery. Some scholars believe it to be an Arabic book, which somehow migrated its way into the Hebrew Scrolls, having been made over into its current form. It is one of a number of texts that clue us to the presence of a sky council, a cabal of advanced species, governing over Project Earth in our distant past. The 38th chapter of the book of Job says this: "Can you bind the chains of Pleiades? Can you shake off the cords of Orion? Can you take charge of a family of stars in their season? Can you lead Sirius with her satellites?" The chains of Pleiades, the cords of Orion, the leadership of Sirius. The language is all about power exerted over humanity from these 3 regions of space. The writer asks the character Job if he is powerful enough to turn the tables and take charge over them, rather than vice versa. Is this a question about overcoming the influence of the stars of planet Earth, i.e., overturning the seasons? Or is the question about chains, cords, and who's in charge of who? Actually, a question of overcoming the power of the visitors from these particular stars? It's an odd question, and an odd coincidence that those are the 3 constellations named. At the gathering of researchers and experiencers in Sydney, I find myself in an animated and eclectic circle of people. It's my privilege to be among them. Over lunch, I fall into conversation with a Cherokee friend who is happy to fill me in on his own story. Chad's patient storytelling introduces me to the prominent place of people from the Pleiades in the ancestral story of many Native American tribes. For instance, the Navajo of New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah identify the stars of the Pleiades as being suns similar to our own. Indeed, in terms of distance, the Pleiades are the closest stars to our own sun and may have been formed in this same process. This in itself hints at the possibility of similar life in that part of galaxy. The Lakota people of the upper Mississippi region claim that their ancestors originated in the Pleiades and that when humans die, their consciousness returns to the Pleiades. The Lakota belief about our soul's afterlife finds an intriguing echo on the other side of the world in East China. At the Xiaoling Mausoleum near Nanjing lie the remains of Emperor Zhu Yanzang, founder of the Ming Dynasty. At his death in 1368, Common Era, the emperor's servants interred his body in a complex of tombs. When viewed from the air, the arrangement of tombs aligns perfectly with the visible stars of the Pleiades. Evidently, Zhu Yanzhang anticipated a journey after death, just like the one anticipated by the Lakota people of North America. Chad first learned of this Pleiadian connection from his father, and Chad passed it on to me. Our ancestors saw egg-shaped craft arrive from the night sky. The people who emerged from the craft were tall and powerful beings. For a time, they lived among our ancestors and showed us how to farm, taught us about health and sanitation, how to cultivate some plants for food and others for medicines. They taught us about the seasons and to live in harmony with the land. After a time, they returned to their craft and made their journey home, a place among the Pleiades. In my family, though, we know that our ancient helpers are still among us. From time to time, their crafts still visit us. My own family carries stories of healing imparted by these people. That is why I have never feared visitors from the stars. I always assumed they were friendly towards humanity. Chad is not the only Native American at this gathering. As we walk around a park flanking the waters of Sydney Harbor, he introduces me to Dean, another friend with Cherokee roots. His experience has left a different kind of mark. Dean works in the world of environmental management. In 1999, he was managing a site in regional New South Wales. It was just after lunch and the team members were arriving back from their breaks and were taking up their places around the site. At precisely 2 p.m., the sky darkened. Dean and his colleagues looked up expecting to see a dark storm cloud. Instead, hovering directly above their site was an enormous saucer-shaped craft. The next thing any of the team remembered, they were waking up, each lying or crumpled where they had fallen. It was 4 p.m., and not one of them had any recollection of the previous 2 hours. Dean, do you have any physical evidence of what might have happened during that missing time? I have a photograph, he says. When we all came to, we could see that one of our team was quite distressed. We gathered round her and saw that she had 3 marks on her upper arm, 3 raised lines in the shape of 3 fingers. They were raw and red, like a burn mark, or like an allergic reaction to something that had touched her bare skin. So I took a photograph of her arm, and I've kept it. How long were these finger marks? About 8 centimeters. About 8 centimeters? I tried to imagine the disorientation of the scene, the oddness of those scars, and the anxiety that must arise from not knowing what had just happened. Dean, have you ever thought about doing some regression therapy to see if any other memories surface? Dean is emphatic. No, I don't think I want to remember. I am deeply grateful to Dean for entrusting me with the story. In telling you, I have changed some inconsequential details out of respect for his privacy. It is a very vulnerable thing to share an experience that you are still in the process of understanding, and I can easily understand Dean's reluctance to retrieve more memory of the encounter. After a trauma, our brains often block out the recollection of experiences it might be too painful to remember. I now wonder if that fact might apply to whole cultures too. As I have read the repeating stories of our world mythologies and found story after story suggesting past traumatic intersections between humanity and visiting species, the stories read like the flashbacks of a patient with amnesia, gradually retrieving the lost moments of a disjointed story, that three-fingered scar. Something about it bothered me. I would want to know what it was. If I had lost time, I would want to remember, wouldn't I? As I sit in the air-conditioned safety of the Greyhound bus, I contemplate the dusk-time bush as it blurs my way from Sydney back to the Australian Capital Territory. Staring through the window into the darkening landscape, I can feel something simmering at the back of my mind, the stirring of some vague memory. It's 1985 again. I am 20 years old and am standing in Great Pulteney Street in the city of Bath. A very attractive young lady has just seen me and called out my name. We have seen each other just recently. Where was it now? My recollection is strangely foggy. As we continue talking, she references places and events from the last couple of days, but my memory is a blank. I have no recollection of the places, events, or days, or her. Desperately, I try to maintain the pretense that I know exactly what we're talking about, but ultimately without success. We both leave the conversation frustrated and horribly embarrassed. As the Greyhound passes the turnoff for Wollongong, another half-memory jostles its way to the surface. I am in my flight on a bright sunny day in 1985, studying the Gospels as I prepare for my first job in the world of ministry later that year. The entry phone buzzes. "Hi, Paul. It's Julie. Just passing by. Thought I'd call in for coffee." Julie and I already know each other, and she has remembered a lot about me from our previous conversations, which is nice. We chat idly for a while over a pot of freshly brewed coffee, a new brand I'm trying out. Julie mentions that she is living in a house in the village, just round the corner from the general store. I know the house. It is notable for being one of the newer properties in the village, late 19th century. As she leaves, I promise to call in on her for a coffee in return. It was a pleasant catch-up. Unfortunately, it's another total blank. I have absolutely no recollection of that girl. None. This time, however, I can follow up. I know Julie's address. I know the house, except that when I call round a couple of days later, I can see that the house is empty. Nobody lives there. Had I remembered wrong? Could I be forgetting more than I thought? Among family and friends, my memory of conversations is well known. In fact, my verbal recall is often sharp enough as to recapture conversations verbatim from years ago. I don't say that to congratulate myself. It is not always a virtue. My recollection of places and dates is also remarkably sharp. Sit me down with friends or family and a photo album, and I will be the one who can pinpoint the place, year, and month for each shot. So these two blanks were highly uncharacteristic and bothered me a great deal. I was not one to go clubbing or get myself into situations where a drink could be spiked or a pill popped. I was a clean living guy. Still am. So these blanks were a real anomaly. Nothing like them has ever happened to me, either before or since. Over the years, from time to time, my mind has returned to the puzzle of these two encounters, only to emerge none the wiser for my efforts to explain these two holes in my memory of 1985. Tonight, on the bus, nothing further offers itself up. Yet something Dean said, a phrase he used, repeats itself in my mind and seems to offer a new framework for these absences. Both were stories of missing time. Could it be that my brain has been protecting me? Has my subconscious mind chosen not to recall days when something traumatic or humiliating may have happened? Is there something my subconscious might not want me to remember? Canberra, Australia Capital Territory, July 2020. With a notepad and a glass of water, I am at my desk just in time for a call from Massachusetts. Patricia is a senior professional with a background in high-level scientific research for a major corporate interest. Today she is sharing with me questions she has carried regarding her own sequence of otherworldly encounters, stretching from the present all the way back to the 1970s when she was a college student in the town of Portales, New Mexico. It was in that chapter of her life that Patricia was entertained one afternoon by a group of people who, though she only met them briefly, had remained indelibly in her mind ever since. The people were tall and light-skinned, blonde-haired, and with a distinctly Scandinavian look. They were, she said, the most perfectly beautiful people she had ever seen. The girl, a fellow student, was talkative and friendly and seemed to have taken quite an interest in Patricia. The two men were huge and so identical in appearance, dress, and haircuts that Patricia assumed they must be twins. The twins were taciturn and appeared to have an almost telepathic communication between the two of them. At some point as their social gathering wore on, something about the situation began to spook Patricia, and she asked to be driven home. So it was with a sigh of relief that she climbed into her own bed that night, except now something else was troubling her. As she lay down to try and sleep, Patricia realized she had absolutely no recollection of her journey home, nor could she explain why it was now 2 a.m. It was all a fog. Over the decades that followed, Patricia did her best to forget about the whole incident. It seemed like nothing. There was no substance to it. So what if the two guys were model handsome, huge, identically dressed and groomed, and telepathic? Perhaps it didn't mean anything. What did it matter if she couldn't remember the journey home? Maybe she drank a spiked drink. Perhaps she had simply slept all the way. It all seemed like nothing. Only she could not forget it. The name of the town where it all happened is Portales, the Spanish word for portals. It sits on Route 70 between the Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis and the Air Force Base at Roswell in the state of New Mexico. Patricia always wondered if that location and the historic reason underlying the name of Portales might be connected in some way with the strangeness of all that she remembered of that episode. Now in 2020, Patricia has been able to compare notes with other experiencers and found a different lens through which to view her decades-old story. Paul, have you ever had a Pleiadian described to you? Do my strange friends sound anything like that to you? I offer Patricia an answer from my knowledge of world mythology. Certainly, there is no shortage of ancestral stories, folklore, and religious texts about benign human-like neighbors who were tall, beautiful, athletic, blonde-haired, and super powerful. Perhaps at certain times and in certain places, people might have called them gods or angels. In the lore of contemporary experiencers, they are called tall whites, or Nordics. And yes, they are associated with Pleiades. As I lay this information on the table for Patricia to consider, I find my speech slowing as I labor to keep myself from being distracted by the most vivid and persistent memory. It is yet another odd encounter, an experience I have done my best to forget, not because it was traumatic. The problem was I could never for the life of me explain why the experience mattered, what it was about, and why it had bothered me so much. Consequently, it is a story I have seldom told. At the time, the encounter threw a clunky old spanner into the works of my well-ordered theology. What I mean is that as a young Christian believer, my Orthodox faith had all the right places for God, the devil, angels, demons, animal, vegetable, and mineral, and nothing else. I just could not work out how this anomaly of an experience fitted into any of these categories. That's why over the years I have almost succeeded in persuading myself that it really was nothing at all and is far better forgotten. Today, as I listen to Patricia's tale of unusual hosts, I'm not so sure. And that's the end of Chapter 8. Peace and blessings to you all.